Phillips. I'm president and CEO of Matthews Studio Equipment. The company's about 46 years old. I've been with the organization for 43 years. It was a startup. I was the third employee. We've built a company that now serves the imaging community, which is motion picture, television, still photographic. It's all electronically captured these days. But we service that industry worldwide. So how did I get messed up in this film business? Well, the simple answer is one pair of drumsticks. That doesn't tell you much. Actually, I was playing rock and roll all through high school and into my 20s. My wife, of course, wanted me out of the business. Touring and clubs and groupies was not conducive to a good marriage and raising children. So still, while I was playing in the bands, we had an opportunity to audition for a Bob Hope picture backing up Frankie Avalon. And we went over to Warner Brothers. We did the audition. We got the job. We rehearsed for a couple of days. We went up to Arrowhead where we shot for a couple of days. And while there, I was watching the technicians, especially the guys who killed the baby. I didn't know what it meant. It was a little scary, but I thought I could kill a baby, although I wouldn't dare try that, but I could turn the light on. So I went home and I said to my wife, I think I've got it, right? I can be one of those guys who turns the light on in the studio. So the following day, I got in the car, I went back to Warner Brothers. I was familiar with that lot. I parked across the street. I went to walk through the gate. Security guard said, where the heck do you think you're going? I said, well, I'm going to go apply for a job. I want to turn the lights on. He looked at me like I had two heads. He said, it doesn't work like that. You have to be in the union. So the day after, I went down. I did some research. I found out where the IATSE Local 728 was. I walked into this older building. I walked up these rickety stairs. I walked into an old office, and here's this guy behind the desk, feet up on the table, reading the newspaper. He looks at me over the newspaper, and he says, yeah, what do you want, kid? I said, well, I want to get into your union. He puts the paper down. He says, you don't understand. You have to have a job before you can get in the union. I said, well, wait a minute. I was told I had to be in the union before I could get a job. So now I'm beginning to understand how things work. At that juncture, he said, well, who do you know? I said, well, in this industry, not really anybody. He said, well, who referred you? I said, well, the security guard over at Warner Brothers. He said, no, that isn't going to work. He said, sorry, kid. So I left. I went home. I thought, how am I going to get in? So I had an idea. The very next day, I went back down to the same union. I went up the same stairs, saw the same guy, feet on the table, reading the current daily newspaper. He looks over the paper at me and he goes, you again. What do you want? I said, well, you said it's all about who you know. He goes, yeah. I said, well, I know you. I met you yesterday. Well, with that, he got a big kick. He laughed. He said, okay, Universal, 6:30 tomorrow, rigging call. I said, I'm there. And that's how I got in. So what are the significant changes that have taken place over the last 40, 50 years? The females on the crews are awesome. When I got in the business, there were very few women working in the industry. Today, there's a lot of females that are doing wonderful work. So I applaud that effort. Changes, of course, camera. Camera got smaller. All the ancillary gear around it got smaller. When I got in, we were using carbon arc lights as a key light. They weighed about 250 pounds. They consumed about 225 amps. It took a lot of them to bring the key level up to standard in order to get your image. So with that, you had all this heat, all these heavy pieces of equipment to move these heavy lights and these heavy cameras. Matter of fact, when I started, they were still using the Mitchell BNC, and some of these cameras were being moved around on Moviola dollies. And then there was the McAllister dolly and the Houston Fearless for moving cameras and cranes. Everything was just really big, heavy, and cumbersome. And that kind of gave way to companies like Matthews, who came in at a time when we served the industry as it was, but we were able to move forward where the cameras got smaller, the ancillary equipment got lighter, and today we just have to move faster, smarter, safer, and that's the industry we're serving today. The things that have stayed pretty constant over all these many years have been the light modifiers. Yeah, the equipment's gotten smaller. Now we've got LEDs, we got 4K, we got all this other stuff, but we still have to modify the light. And with that, the silks and the blacks, you either create a shadow, take a shadow away, the nets, the other fabrics to diffuse the light. those have really stayed pretty constant throughout all of this technological change. So one might ask, what is it about Hollywood that makes it so special? And I have to go back to, gosh, even after I got in the business, but anybody who understood film could look at a picture, if it were shot in New York, and know immediately it was a New York production. And only two things gave it away: the lighting and the way the cameras moved. If you had a big shoot and you needed a big stage and you had a lot of tricks and effects, you had to do it in Hollywood, or you had to go to the UK and do it over in Europe. That was about it. If you were doing a Burt Reynolds, car chase through the South, yeah, you'd shoot that in Atlanta. But that was about it. Today, you can shoot pictures anywhere in the world. There are good technicians pretty much everywhere around the world. So what is it that makes Hollywood special? It's still the mecca of the industry. The deals are done here. The major studios are here. The weather's great. It's very expensive to live here. For some crazy reason, those of us who are here love it. You talk about the apprenticeship program as it is today. I really can't speak to that because I'm not familiar with it. I am knowledgeable in the fact that there are film schools worldwide and they're pumping out thousands of graduates. I just hope we all, or they all, can find work. When I got in, you worked on the rigging crews, as I said earlier. You'd hang lights, you'd set lights, you'd maybe pre-light for the next day, and that was kind of like the on-the-job training, and that's how the grips learned. The electricians, camera operators, assistants. There was a program for that. I don't know that really exists today. So one might ask, where's the artwork and gripology? The director, the PA, those are both entry-level positions. The rest of us, we've really got to learn our craft. It's a job that you learn hands-on. And sometimes they're asked to build these huge walls, for example, for green screen and digital shots. And they take 48-foot containers, they stack them 3 high. They're 100 feet long. That gives them the platform to do that. Every day they're asked to suspend something, in a way that's unconventional. So they're what I call the on-site engineer. And I think, a big company with a budget and a lot of responsibilities can't work without the grips. Oftentimes I'm asked, how did the C-stand, Century Stand, ever get its name? Well, there's 2 answers, and both are totally correct. The first I'm going to give you is not nearly as glamorous as the second answer, but it has to do with a company back in the early days of filmmaking called Century Lighting, which then became Strand Century and then Century Strand. Century Lighting, every time they put out a light and a stand, the stand under that light was called a Century Stand. True, but not very glamorous. Here comes the good story. When Cecil B. DeMille left New York, which is where the film industry was born, chasing the sun, because this is before Edison really perfected this thing called electricity, and they were using sunlight as the key light, and that was the only light source they had. And New York is not known for having continuous, constant good weather. So he got on the train, and they say had Cecil B. DeMille taken the inlet route, Hollywood might very well have been Phoenix, Arizona. But thank God for us, he took the coastal route. He got off here in Los Angeles, looked up and said, this is perfect. So they began the process in the 1920s for building studios, which had rotating stages. So they would build the set outdoors on the stage, and they would rotate the stage and chase the sun. Well, just as we do today with light modifiers, they had to modify and control this single light source. So they would use textiles, even back then, that we still kind of use today, silks and reflective materials, but how did they hold them? Well, the grips in the early days were out of the theatrical business. They were off the stage. So that's where they hired stage hands, which later became grips. Now, they still had to hold these light modifiers. So what they knew how to do was take lumber, and they would build a tripod or an easel, if you will, and then they would nail the artificial material or the silk or whatever it might be to this tripod or easel. Well, they were non-telescopic, so they had 50-inch easels, 100-inch easels, 200-inch easels, and of course, slang being everything in filmmaking, the 100-inch easel was the most common, and it became known as the Century Stand. So with the advent of LED, what are some of the technological changes that we might expect with grip equipment and other support equipment for that matter? There's plenty of smaller dollies. You don't need as big of a dolly to move your camera from point A to point B. There are sliders. There's a variety of sliders. We think ours is the best, but so does every other manufacturer. Stands are going to get smaller. They have to be faster, less costly, and safe. It's getting to the point now that equipment is becoming so small. This is our new C stand that we'll be coming out with in the next year, along with all of our other mini grip equipment. I'm just kidding. But things are getting smaller, lighter, and they have to be safer. When you talk about some of the newer equipment with the sliders, which aren't that new, they've been around for a lot of years. They just kind of came back into fashion, if you will. They're a great asset to a crab dolly where you can get that push at the end, or you can compensate for the actor missing his or her mark. But they've also become standalone, where you don't necessarily need to lug that dolly up to the second floor. You can get the shot off with the slider. So, I mean, every tool has its place, horses for courses. Sliders are great. I think, as I said earlier, I think we build a really fine slider. There are so many others out there, all of which are good. It's just some are better than others, and ours is the best. We rely heavily on the grips to come in and consult with us where we can, build special gags, but at the same time, hear from them. What are their needs? What's lacking? And some of them are so passionate about what they do, and they want to see their products come to life, their babies grow up, so to speak. So we work in collaboration, and, we've never taken anything from anybody. We really pride ourselves in providing compensation to those who bring us ideas, and that then feeds more ideas to the company, and that's what we rely on in terms of advancing our technology. It comes from the people who use the equipment. It was 3 years ago that we built this facility, and I'm so proud of it. I think that the company is the people. It's the people who produce all of this gear. And we provide a facility for the people that is very kind to them in their needs, where they feel that their contribution to the finished product and to the industry that we serve is of value. And so, since we made the move over here, while it was very expensive, the biggest benefit of this facility and all the money that was spent in building it has been the increase in morale, the increase in the quality of what we do, and our ability to better serve the industry. The people love working here. They look forward to coming to work, and they're very proud of what they do in serving this very wonderful industry. Somebody once asked me, what are the 3 essential tools that a filmmaker really needs in his or her kit? It's basically 3 lights with stands, some scrims and flags, a half a dozen C stands, and a camera. And that's it, right? Now, what you do is you build upon that depending upon the size of your project. I don't know if these are, well-known secrets, or if people sometimes just don't fully understand the products or their use. For example, why would one use a muslin to bounce light when it's a transparent fabric? It's going to let the light through, and it's going to create other problems behind the muslin where the light may leak onto the set, as opposed to a matte bounce, which has an opaque backing to it, and therefore that white becomes a definite bounce. I mean, those are little things, but you wonder what people know and what they don't, what they still need to learn. There's a part of the story that I haven't yet shared. When I first started over at Universal, when I got that call, and I was on the rigging crew. I was on the mountain where City Walk now stands, and I'm dragging this 100 feet of 4/0 cable up the hill, and it weighs 100 pounds, I'd get so far up, and then I'd fall, and I'd get up, and I'd try it again, I'd fall. And then about on the 3rd fall of my first day, I looked down at the lot, and I saw all the suits coming in their very expensive cars. And I just looked at it, and I said, someday, I don't know how, but someday I'm going to be one of those. I'm going to be somebody, So now fast forward about 20 years, Matthews has always been an innovator. It's always, been very proud of what it's done. We don't copy others. We don't believe in that. They say copying is the highest form of flattery. I say it's the cheapest form of engineering. But here we were with a product we call the tulip crane. which we had innovated. It was a crane that folds up for transportation so that one can get it up on the roof, in an elevator, where have you. And it was in Florida working on a Universal picture with Burt Reynolds, who was co producing. Well, the crane operator made a terrible mistake. The crane toppled over and litigation ensued. So the then CEO and president of Universal, Lou Wasserman, decided that he was going to try to mitigate this occurrence. And so he called all the lawyers up to his office. I've never to this day been in a suite that looked like that. It was awesome. But there I am. Now I'm coming through the gate to get into the studio. And, I know I'm going into this meeting with all these lawyers. So I've got my very best suit on. I'm driving my little car. And as I make the turn to go into the parking lot, I look up at that mountain and I went, I made it. Except I'm getting the crap suit out of me, but I made it. Now as it turned out, I learned a very valuable lesson. You cannot just manufacture something and put it out into the mainstream of commerce. You have to be able to rely on the tests you've done and the integrity of that product which you put in somebody else's hands. As it was later found out, after it never got settled, it went to court, we were found to be 8% guilty. The reason we were found to be 8% guilty was we failed to put a disclaimer on the crane which said, do not operate this machine if you're under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Lesson learned the hard way. So that's a story I'll never forget. And that was probably about 20 years after I joined the company. When I first came to work at Matthews, as I said earlier, it was in its infancy. It was really founded by a guy whose name was Roy Isaiah. Roy passed away last year. And the company's name at the time was Isaiah and Company. So as we began building equipment and we, you know, we started sending out an invoice here and there. We were both working nights and doing grip manufacturing during the day. It was time to incorporate. And his wife had just given birth to their first child, whom they named Matthew. And so at this very emotional time, when we had to file a registration for the corporation, we decided to call it Matthews. And that's how the company got its name.